if Google's not able to properly index your content, that's always a high priority issue, right? Two big reasons to be excited about technical SEO is if you can find a technical problem, you solve it on one page template, you can scale it to 100,000 pages. The power of log data is being able to see exactly what Google's crawling, what it's not, what user agent is it crawling from. You can use log file analysis to understand, is Google crawling my content? Is it crawling all my priority pages? Is it crawling pages I don't care about, right?
In today's episode, we're joined by Chris Long. Chris is the VP of Marketing at Go Fish Digital. He specializes in tackling unique problems and complex search scenarios to enhance organic traffic, leveraging his profound understanding of Google's algorithm and web technologies. His expertise spans a comprehensive range of technical SEO skills, including website architecture analysis, structured data implementation, a crawl control strategy, as well as log file analysis, keyword research, and on-page optimization. Chris's thought leadership extends beyond client work, as evidenced by his active speaking roles in industry conferences such as SMX East, State of Search, and the Raleigh SEO Meetup. Chris also shares his insights through well-regarded publications like Moz, Search Engine Land, and The Next Web. Join us in today's episode as we explore technical SEO and its impact on digital marketing strategies. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Digital Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Eli Adams. Today's episode is brought to you by FireUsMarketing.com, where SEO solutions pave the way to digital excellence. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Eli, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to get going.
Yeah, me too. I'm very excited. And I say this in the last handful of podcasts I have done. I've met most people in the SEO world on LinkedIn. And you are definitely in the top 5 posts that show up every single time I get on LinkedIn. And your insights, the technical knowledge you have for SEO is like nothing I've seen before. So I'm very excited to dive in and learn from you. In fact, I probably save more LinkedIn posts from you than anyone else, just so that I can go back and reference and learn. And so I appreciate the value that you add on that network for sure. Before we dive into the technical side of things, let's learn a little bit about who Chris is. So where are you from? Where'd you grow up? What'd you want to be when you were little? And how'd you go from there to getting into the digital world?
Yeah. So I'm from Harrisburg, PA, Harrisburg, Hershey, PA. So home of Hershey's chocolate. I live 5 minutes away from there. So grew up there, kind of rural PA, not a lot going on. Then I ended up going to college at University of Pittsburgh. So at the time, as a 18-year-old, Pittsburgh felt like a very, very big city, right? Spent a lot of time there, ended up going to college, spent a little time after. Actually met my wife there, which was great. And then I studied finance in University of Pittsburgh. Kind of was just ambivalent about it the entire time I was going to university. I was I guess I'll do this. It seems fine. It's whatever. It's I like it well enough. Come graduation, it's I kind of sat down and realized wait, I just spent the last 4 years learning to be a banker. And not that there's anything wrong with that. I just realized it wasn't for me. And it's I just didn't, it wasn't until I was actually tasked with having to get a job that I realized oh shoot, I need to go find something that I'm a little bit more interested in. So I kind of, panicked, just calling my parents and being hey, I don't know how to get a job, all this, kind of having a little bit of a post-graduation meltdown. I ended up kind of learning about SEO, just online, just kind of was oh, well, if I had to go do it over again, I'd do marketing. So what kinds of digital marketing there's out there. I think that's interesting because I search things a lot, right? And that's how I make purchasing decisions. So it's probably how other people do too. Ended up kind of stumbling into SEO that way. Found the Moz Beginner's Guide, which was kind of oh, this does sound like something I could do, something I think that could I could help connect people with the information that they're looking for. And then I just started calling every single every single SEO web design agency in Pittsburgh. They had SEO on the site. Didn't matter. It's it didn't matter what else they did. They could have done web design, traditional PR, just offered SEO as a side. I was cold calling, being hey, can I get an internship? Can I get an internship? Probably called 60, 100 different places until finally some guy picked up the phone in my first agency called Vendilli Group. He was yeah, I'll give you a shot. And so started there, and kind of haven't looked back since.
Do you think there's anything in your childhood that maybe prepared you for those skills? Do you think that going into finance kind of helped in the skills for SEO because you have to be like so meticulous, or was it just like, hey, I think I'll just try this?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's like, I think, I've always had a propensity, like a little bit of a propensity for like math. I'm not great at it, right? But I generally understand it. It's generally been like one of my better courses. So I like the data. So the data side kind of appealed to me.
Yeah.
Um, I think what's appealed to me overall with SEO is it's just a mix of like so many different disciplines, right? Like you do have the data side, but then you have like the marketing and positioning side. You have copywriting. Like you can if you're great at PR, you can be good at link building, right? And
Yeah.
then there's the technical element, which I did not have before before like I started my career. Kind of built as I went along and learned from some really smart people. So it's just really like beautiful blend of like all these three things. um, so really you just have to be like, to be a strong SEO, it's like you have to be so cross-functionally like disciplined in like so many different areas, whether that's copy, UX, brand, like tech, like it, and different types of sites need those different types of things, right? So
Hmm.
I think that's one of the most appealing aspects is just like, hey, you could not get bored doing this, right? You could, if you
Yeah.
want, you can go full on technical, or if you want, you can go full on content brand positioning. You can like even choose your little path within it. And
It's interesting because when I talk with people, on this podcast about their backgrounds, a lot of people who like went to college for English or wanted to, write books when they were little and stuff, they're really heavy onto the SEO content side of things and really, really good at that. And others who wanted to be like engineers, or for you example, in like I think in the finance industry, you spreadsheets a lot and you think like if this then that type of a mentality, right? Uh, at what point were you like, "Hey, I need to learn more technical than some of this like high level SEO?" I feel like the majority of SEOs in the world right now are just they just kind of do the high level stuff and don't really dig deep. How did you get pushed in the direction of really deep understanding of technical SEO?
yeah, so that definitely happened at my current agency, Go Fish Digital. So I went there and then immediately, like on my first day, like I'm working on some like enterprise level accounts, right? It's like stuff I like very, out of my wheelhouse to do when I first started.
Yeah.
Um, and really it was one of the co-founders, Dan Hinckley, like he kind of like turned me on to the idea. It's like, hey, yes, it's like the content is like oftentimes like the bulk of the work, right? But it's like in that 20%, it's like you really need to know, you have to have a better technical understanding because the way is like the way a lot of the big reasons that like a lot of enterprise companies partner with us is because we understand both, and because I understood this very large site. I understood the implications of having a subdomain plus a subfolder, and I saw the opportunity for them to switch, and I presented the opportunity. They did it, and saw traffic basically double after doing so. But if you're not technical, you're going to completely miss that opportunity, right? And keep posting as much content you want as the subdomain, but it might only get like 50% of its potential. So
Yeah.
that was kind of eye opening, right? That like these small, seemingly like insignificant, like technical changes, like really did make a huge difference.
Hmm.
Um, and I think as I've gotten further along, I think the exciting part of the technical side is that it scales, right? It scales and it's cheap. Those like one of the two big reasons to be like excited about technical SEO is like, if you can find a technical problem, like you solve it on one page template, you can scale it to 100,000 pages, right? And like you just fixed probably a very large, like large scale site problem that something had. And as well, it's like, it's fairly cheap to implement. If like oftentimes if it's let's say a simple robots.txt command, or you did find something in the HTML, you want to just a canonical tag, a crawl
Yeah.
directive, whatever it is, like those things can take like developers like 5 minutes to implement sometimes, right? It's like you're not
Hmm.
pitching this huge content initiative that someone might have to like go and execute on. So that's also one of the exciting parts about the technical is the scalability of it. And it's like, it makes sense from a cost perspective for a lot of businesses. So I
Yeah.
started to value that more kind of as I went along and started to consult for people that had to solve technical problems.
It's very foundational, I think. I was interviewing Christine Sackinger yesterday, and she brought this up. I don't know if you know who she is, but super smart, really understands algorithms, and she's like the foundational piece may not be the most important, but if you don't have the foundation, none of the other stuff works as good, right? And so I think that's kind of what you're saying is like the technical SEO really is the foundation. I love the aspect of it's scalable because content does take a long time. It takes a long time to plan. It takes a long time if you're in a bigger company to convince executives. It can be pricey. And if you find that one technical thing like a canonical tag off or something, it doesn't take that long to fix across the whole website. So I love that approach. Talk me through what you're currently working on that excites you. You wake up in the morning, you're like, man, I can't wait to go and tackle this. What's that for you right now?
Yeah, so it's a multitude of things right now. One, I'm excited about kind of the future of AI in search. It's like I think AI is going to turn to a lot of people like go change, take a lot of SEOs and change them from just maybe more marketers and like be able to change marketers and actual creators to be able to create custom tooling. Um, we've actually built tools that basically allow you that basically embed your content similar to how an LLM would, and then compare that embedding against the target keyword you're trying to rank for, and it approximates the similarity score. So basically, how similar is your page to the target keyword using an actual numeric value using Google's own embedding model. So that's a super exciting one that our co-founder Dan has been heads down making for the past year. We've finally been able to release it. I was starting to like consult with some people on like how to improve their pages by using it. The second one is right. It's like I've transitioned a little more into the sales and marketing side for our own company. And just I get to have conversations with business owners about how to improve their digital strategies. Right. It's like oftentimes now I'm the first point of contact someone's making to say, hey, we know we need to grow organically, but we need a strategy to do so. Right. And I love having those conversations because it can be an ecom site, it can be a B2B site, it can be a small upstart or a large enterprise site. Right. It's so varied, right? And it's fun to be able to go and figure out, like to look at just how different sites or different companies approach different problems, because some of them do it very creatively. And it's super interesting to see. So it's like, it keeps kind of marketing not dry, not stale. It keeps you kind of excited to kind of wake up every morning and have these type of conversations.
Is that AI tool the one that I signed up for the waiting list this morning on your LinkedIn? Is that the same
Yeah.
one?
Yeah. That's the
Nice.
one.
Nice. Excited about that. Talk to me more about your thoughts around AI. Like I think that there's differing opinions in the world of SEO. I think what you're using it for as a tool versus like as a creator is really smart. But what are your thoughts on AI and SEO?
Yeah. I think generally, I think that's the way. I think in order to succeed in SEO, you have to understand AI, right? I,
Mhm.
I think people commonly conflate where it's like people who are pro and excited about AI and SEO means like they're super excited about like you can create all this content at once, right? That's less exciting to me. It's more about like being able to create your own solutions, right? Being able to scale, scale ways of looking at problems. Like our co-founder created a very simple Chrome extension that basically would using ChatGPT created a very simple Chrome extension that would like literally scroll down the first page in the search results, run it through ChatGPT, and ChatGPT will then analyze whether the search result is informational, transactional, or commercial, right? And then by doing that, right, instead of like an SEO having to manually go through each individual result and then count one by one, we have the tooling do it for you. So I think it's like do SEO, it's like you're going to learn that. We're going to need to know how to use SEO AI to operationalize what you're doing. I think that's the biggest
Yeah.
power in it. So I think that's one of the more exciting parts is right. It's like I'm always someone who's like wanted to cut the tedious elements of their job out. 'Cause I get tired of like doing this like same. I don't like monotony or like the same monotonous work. So the more you can figure out, hey, how do I use this as a tool to help me do my job faster, to cut to exactly what I'm looking at a little bit quicker, the better you're going to do. So, I think there's some fear about like AI automation, how much it's going to replace all of us. I think that marketers in general, right, will embrace it and learn how to use it to be more efficient are going to be the ones who succeed at the end of the day.
Yeah, they can 10 times the amount of output versus worrying about your job being taken. How about you just do 10 times the amount of work using tools like AI, right? Add a lot more value to your clients. I think that's powerful. I love the idea of what your co-founder did. and analyze the search results. I think that's really cool. If we were to dive into the technical side of things, so now imagine I'm a business owner or an up and coming, digital marketer, and I'm listening to this podcast and I'm thinking I need to take a different approach on my SEO, or I need to elevate my business in a different way than I've thought of before. Um, when you get into a new client and you're doing an audit, what are sort of the first handful of things that you look for from a technical aspect?
Yeah, especially from a technical aspect. One, I think the first step is to understand, like, truly, like, is technical like a right fit? It's like, I do think there is a lot of situations where it's like people who are really technical and excited about like all the shiny new things, like trying to shoehorn technical SEO into everything. But the fact of the matter is, right, if you have a 150-page site or something like that, technical SEO can be good, but you probably want to start with the content. But if you have like a 100,000-page site or 50,000-page site, then you really want to lean into the technical aspect. So the first, but beyond that, right, like the one of the big things you want to look for, right, is like anything like causing like indexing issues. Because let's say you have a 100,000-page ecom site and Google is only able to index like 30% of your product pages. Well, that's a huge opportunity cost in terms of like revenue, right? So it's like, if Google's not able to properly index your content, that's always a high priority issue, right? So it's like
Yeah.
looking at things like, can you see like in the index coverage reports, can you see things where it's like, hey, Google's not able to index this. It's like says crawl, but not indexed, or it's discovered, but not indexed. For whatever reason, it's getting caught in Google's filters. Like those are always extremely high priority situations, right? Um, the next will be the next element will be like crawling, right? And like, or I guess also indexation in terms of like partial indexation, because if you're loading a lot of content through JavaScript, right, you need to be sure Google is able to see the entire page. So we used to see it more and more. I think it's becoming less as good, especially Google keeps advancing on how they crawl JavaScript. But
Hmm.
looking for elements where it's like, hey, Google's only getting a partial index here, you need to be aware of that. From there, it's also like if you have a large site, like if you really want to get deep in technical, it's like figuring out like, hey, what's the site hierarchy look like? What's the technical infrastructure of your site look like? If you're an e-com site, can Google naturally crawl down in natural steps where it's like, you know, your dresses, your spring dresses, right? And then other further deeper subcategories. You want to be able to ensure you're structuring your content in a logical way, in a way that's going to make sense for users, in a way that's going to make sense for search engines. Site hierarchy is probably one of the bigger elements of technical SEO, and it's involved like basically like, how does your internal linking structure work? And can users in Google properly step down from like the parent-child relationships?
Do you have some favorite tools that you like to use when doing some of these audits?
Yeah. So Screaming Frog is big. Screaming Frog is probably the biggest for that, right? It's like Screaming Frog actually has, I believe, like a path page report that'll show you. It'll show you exactly like what the site hierarchy looks like. You can also use some of their crawl visualization tools. Um, that's a really big tool to help like discover, hey, what are some of these like hierarchy issues as well. Screaming Frog helps with rendering, right? You can like really turn Screaming Frog. You can run a crawl with Screaming Frog like JavaScript turned on, and then run it with it turned off. And then you can compare. We did that for like a large enterprise marketplace where it's like we
Mhm.
compared, hey, how does Google like how's the JavaScript crawl look against the HTML crawl? And you can see how much more content's loaded through JavaScript. How like if there's like what sections are potentially loaded through JavaScript. There's like a crawl diff report. So like
Mhm.
you can do all of that with Screaming Frog. So it's like it's there's a lot of other tools out there, and it's some really good ones for enterprise, right? Spotify, Lumar, especially if you're like an enterprise site. But if you're, for a lot of sites that might be smaller but still need tech SEO support, Screaming Frog's a great solution.
Okay, so now let's say you get on Screaming Frog, you do this analysis, you find out that maybe you're having an indexing problem. Um, what do you do next?
Yeah. So it depends on what the indexing problem is, right? So like a very common one would be you go into Search Console and you look at Google's index coverage report. You can filter down by like, hey, of all the different issues, what are my top issues, right? You can like really you can distort it. So you might find that your top issue is that Google's saying crawled, currently not indexed. That's one of the most common indexing issues. And then from there, you do have to do some manual investigating and troubleshooting about like what the problem is. So if it's crawled, currently not indexed, well, that might be because Google thinks the content is duplicate from another site, whether it's on your own site or a cross site. It might be because it thinks the content is thin. It might just because there's not, it might be because you have like language like expired product or something like that, or sold out.
Mm.
Like you really have to like look and see why Google is not indexing that individual content. As well, if you're fine, or if you're just finding that for whatever reason, like you're a large ecom site, you see that Google isn't indexing your product pages, well, then you might say, hey, we need to take a look at like our internal linking structure because if Google's not indexing it, right, and we feel like it can't reach it because it's cut off from the crawl, we need to figure out, hey, how do we naturally internally link it? Some like in the past, it makes sense along the homepage. How do we add it to the site? Do we add it to the sitemap.xml, right? There's all different types of things. So the indexing issue is really going to depend on the reason it's not getting indexed. And that's where your more traditional SEO skills and investigative skills are going to come into place. How to figure out why Google isn't crawling it, and then what are the next best steps.
I feel like internal linking is a really hot topic right now, um, and I think a lot of people don't know how to do it correctly, right? So, what's your strategy? Is there a tool that helps analyze and say, "Here's what you do," or is it more like a manual process to go to each page and say, "Here's where we need to link for a good internal linking structure"?
Yeah, so it can be both, right? Once again, Screaming Frog is going to be one of the best ones. It has multiple reports. Like Screaming Frog has a tool, like a process called engram analysis. Like, and you can actually see like based on the engrams of your site, which one are you linking to. So it almost shows you like like using engrams, what's the most commonly linked text on your site, which identifies opportunities. So that's another good one. You can also identify it's like, hey, what are your most linked to pages? And what are your most like least linked to pages? If you see, hey, at least linked to pages are like really high priority revenue drivers, well, that might be an indication that we need to link to them more. We have a lot of theories that rankings also are influenced by crawl rates. So if Google can crawl the page more, it's more likely to rank the page. So that's why so much emphasis is focused on internal linking, because Google Google might assume the more you push them to crawl these pages, the higher priority those pages are within your structure.
Mm.
It's also taking a look at it programmatically though, right? Like once again, if we're talking technical SEO is huge for ecom, right? Well, it's like really tear down your competitor site and look at every single element that they're doing to like internally link. Like, are they using a breadcrumb? Do they link the name of the product on your collection pages, like actually using the name instead of just like a button to click here or a widget? Do they have related categories at the bottom? Do they have related products? How are they drilling down into subcategories? Like looking at oftentimes the best ideas come from like really high performing competitors. Like if you're saying, hey, we want to develop an internal linking strategy, but it needs to scale because we can't just look at it one by one. Well, then you need to take a look at, hey, who are the top ranking competitors? What modules, what features they have in place to actually scale out the internal linking solutions, because those are going to have the highest amount of returns.
So, speaking of e-commerce websites, I feel like one of the bigger concerns that e-commerce websites have is duplicate content and not setting up canonicals correctly. Is that, in your experience, the same?
Yeah, like that can be a very common one. And one of the biggest common reasons for duplicate content on e-com sites is that left hand, the faceted navigation on the left, right? That faceted navigation where you can select your price, your color, maybe subcategories of the product, or whatever the pattern. It can go on and on. And the problem is, right, is because oftentimes the way e-commerce sites are set up is that every single combination of all those different variations are a different page. So, your small $10 t-shirts, that's one page. And your small $20 t-shirts, that's another page. And your small $10 straight t-shirts, that's another page. And right, very quickly adding a faceted navigation can put your crawl out of control, right? Because even a very basic faceted navigation can create hundreds of thousands of new pages on your site. The reason there might be duplicate content is all those versions might be in essence duplicate or very similar to each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you might have 50,000 of those pages have the bulk of the same inventory, right? So that's where you need to like learn how to control that faceted navigation. Canonically is generally one of the better ways to do it, where you're referencing back that actual source page. You can also robots.txt block. People used to use no index. I rarely see that anymore. Most enterprise solutions are using the canonical tag. That seems to be one of the best methods for faceted navigations. But but that's why duplicate content runs rampant on e-commerce sites, especially, is the faceted nav creates most of it.
You mentioned what, we want to make sure that Google crawls the website. So talk about crawl depth, crawl equity. How do you analyze crawl equity? How do you better crawl equity? Let's talk through that.
Yeah, so crawl depth, in case people don't know, crawl depth is basically the steps from your home page that any page is, right? So if it takes a user 3 links to get from your home page to another page on your site, that would have a crawl depth of 3. So it's
Yeah.
the number of links between the home page and then the final page on your site. Generally in SEO, it's best practice not to have super deep crawl depths, right? So you really don't want a crawl depth of more than like 6. I'd say that's on like the even high end. If it's a high priority page, you don't even want a crawl depth probably higher than 2, to be honest. So how you eliminate the crawl depth, though, is you figure out generally scalable ways to internally link to those pages that are deeper, right? So let's say for whatever reason, you had a weird configuration on your site where it took, forward links to get to your blog. Would that mean end of every single blog post, it takes 5 links to get to? So every single blog post you have now has a crawl depth of at least 5 to start. You would want to figure out, hey, do we just make a simple change, right? And add the blog to our like heading navigation. That way, everything in our blog posts, all of our blogs will have at least generally a crawl depth of like 3 to 4 because our blog is only one step away from the homepage. Screaming Frog helps analyze that. If you crawl your site and just go into the internal HTML, if you go into the internal HTML report, it'll literally there'll be a column that says crawl depth, and you can just sort by that column. And then you can just go up to the higher numbers and say, hey, now I'm starting to see patterns of these pages that generally have higher crawl depths. One of the easiest ways to find it. Anyone's looking for like a really great solution, it's like the New York Times. If you go to their sitemap, at the very bottom, it's called Spider Bites. It used to be called Spider Bites. Literally, they have articles from the 1800s. They're like no more than like 4 like a crawl depth of 4 or less away from their homepage.
Wow.
That's because they've stood up this HTML sitemap in such a fashion that every single article on their site can be basically reached in like 5 links or less. It's one of the best HTML sitemaps, one of the best ways to eliminate crawl depth, and at least ensure Google like has a path to get to some of their deeper pages to even surface those articles from like the 1800s.
What about crawl equity?
Well, yeah, link equity. So link equity is basically the concept, right? That your home, that the basically the power of your homepage, right, or the power of your primary pages flows down. So if your homepage has 100% link equity, and then to its sub pages, let's say it passes 50%, those sub pages pass 25%, and then the equity flows beyond your site, right? The idea there is that you want to structure higher, like your really powerful pages higher up so they receive more equity, right? So if you have like your most important landing pages, they need to be in the navigation. They need to be linked from like your individual blog posts. They need to be linked from other product pages because you're basically pushing more equity, right, to those individual pages. The concept of link equity has been debated. I think it's getting a little bit less and less diminished. I think Google's putting a fewer emphasis on equity signals as opposed to content signals. I think Google's really ratcheted that part of their algorithm up, but it still matters, right? Generally, what we see when we do analysis is that the sites with the highest amount of referring domains generally also have like the best rankings. This would be no exception, right? So it's like, can you figure out, hey, I'm seeing like really high priority pages, like deep in the site architecture, or we need to figure out ways to funnel those back up because that'll naturally give them more power from an equity standpoint.
How important is schema markup these days?
Yeah, schema markup's huge, honestly. I think it's one of the probably most underrated aspects of technical SEO. Schema markup basically it's code you put on your site. It tells Google what the page is about, right? You were just talking to a very large player in the event space today, and talking about their structured data implementation and saying, hey, you need to have like this event schema on all of your pages. Yes, it tells Google what the page is about, but it also potentially makes you eligible for rich results features, right? Basically, Google needs schema as a scalable way for it to understand the web as a whole. And that's why it puts such an emphasis on it. So it basically Google one of the reasons it needs it is they say, hey, crawling the web is expensive. And then when we get there to a page, even if it's still well written, right? So let's say it's your event page, we need to crawl, we need to understand, we need to embed the content and understand, like, is it similar to the target keyword? Schema is a way that shortcuts that and makes it cheaper for Google, right? It makes your site be 100% clear about this is what the page is about, right? That's the power of schema, and especially when done at scale. So we work with like a large e-commerce site that was loading all of their content through JavaScript. And because of the way we were loading it, we were like, Google might be having problems figuring out what's going on. You're doing this in a bit of a wonky way. It's basically like you're serving like different products to Google every time it visits. So we need to be more clear on like what it should look like. So we recommended adding basically collection page schema to their individual category pages before they didn't have image thumbnails showing up, after they did. The reason probably is we just scaled Google's ability to actually understand what the content of the page was about. And then it felt more confident where it said, hey, now I can serve the images in the actual search results because I understand what that structured data is. So Google uses structured data to not only understand the content, but like powers rich results. I think it's probably one of the most underutilized like aspects. Like it's like, especially in technical SEO, we're moving toward more of like a feed, a structured based, like almost realm. Like even like things like AI overviews or like the initial mockups of like search generative experience were heavily reliant on data feeds. If you go to Google's like e-commerce help center, it stresses the importance of data feeds, which is basically just another form of structured data. The point being, Google is really pushing everybody toward making their content, their pages in more structured data. So it adds cheaper to crawl, it's easier to understand, and they can better push it at scale, right? The less crawling, I think Google's goal at the end of the day is that you can eliminate crawling, right? And basically have you push, they want you to almost like push your information directly to them via different feeds, right? And that's the goal, especially what they want a lot of retailers to do.
Yeah. And that's super important, especially for those e-commerce websites. Like if you don't have your images showing up in the search, like your click-through rate drops drastically as well.
Right. And especially if all your competitors have it and you don't.
Yeah, 100%. I also I was doing some homework last night on schema around FAQs and looking at the search results around FAQs where it shows your result and it has your drop downs of all your FAQs for those pages. I think that helps the click-through rate as well. You can take a lot of what the people say section and implement those into the pages that are ranking around those keywords, and you can be the one that pulls up those drop downs, which I thought was pretty cool as well. In the bio, we talked about how you pull log data to help with SEO. Is that like server data, or help me understand what that means and how you use that to do SEO?
Yep. So log file analysis is the idea of basically being able to see exactly what Google's crawling on your site, right? The server logs will not lie to you. So your server logs basically have a record of any time you visit the site. Like, right, if I go and visit like the Nike site, right, it's going to be a server log that says, hey, this browser hits your site at this exact time, right? And then it would be associated with the user agent of my computer, right? And it would have an identifier, broadly like my browser, right? Googlebot basically has a specific user agent that it calls from, right? That is very easily identifiable. That shows up in log file data, right? The point of log file data is you can start to see Google's crawl behavior. So we were doing this especially a lot when like Google introduced like accelerated mobile pages, which is like the mobile format that it wanted for pushing users to. We would analyze site crawl data that was basically like full records of Google's crawl and found that, hey, when they had AMP pages on the site, Google would ramp up the crawl to those individual pages. The power of log data is being able to see exactly what Google's crawling, what it's not, what user agent is it crawling from. So we were doing this in research even back before Google switched to crawling from MobileBot first only. But even before that, we saw, hey, Googlebot is crawling from mobile devices. This means that your mobile device is a canonical version of your page, right? Because Google's like 70% of its crawl comes from mobile devices. So you can use log file analysis to understand, like, is Google crawling my content? Is it crawling all my priority pages? Is it crawling pages I don't care about, right? It's like, that's a big reason for log file analysis. Like, hey, Google is finding these random pages in our site that like are somehow got auto-generated or like It's calling thousands of individual user reviews and going out of control. We need to figure out a way to stop that so it spends more time on the content we actually care about. So log file, the Google tools are nice and a good shortcut, especially if you don't like have access or like, want to coordinate with the developer on a regular basis in order to get logs. But if you really truly want to know decisively what is Google crawling on my site and what isn't it, log file analysis is a good way to go.
That's powerful, and I don't think a lot of people use that. I don't use it. I've used it in the past when I've worked for bigger companies, but now just like with my current clients and stuff, I haven't thought about doing that. Now that you bring it up, I am going to do it though. And you brought up another point, which was going to be one of my other questions, is around AMP pages. Are AMP pages still? I know they're not as popular as they used to be. Are they still important? Do you still recommend people implement them?
No, generally no. I think Google is basically largely killed off the AMP program. Almost similar to structured data. It was one of their big pushes to make content more mobile friendly so they could crawl it easier and hopefully a little bit faster. My friend Patrick Stocks, who works at Ahrefs, wrote this phenomenal article at the time called "The AMP is a Lie," where basically he was talking about it's a lot of work to put your site into AMP, right? AMP has very strong limitations on what you can do from a JavaScript CSS perspective. It's if you're going to use, his point was if you're going to do all that, just make your page faster. Just make your page faster to begin with, so you don't have to move to an entirely new framework in order to do it. Yeah. So AMP is largely died off, but I think it's a good story of be wary of the new Google initiatives, right? Some are good, right? Where it's hey, Google's introducing structured data. It's cheap to implement. You don't have to jump to a new framework to do it. But when Google starts pushing us toward maybe making decisions that kind of shoehorn us into technology that might not be the most beneficial from whatever standpoint, be leery of that, because Google is basically getting top stories before. We worked with a lot of news publishers. Google was more prioritizing AMP pages, and now now that's completely gone away.
So if I implemented AMP pages 5 years ago on my site and I'm listening to this podcast and I hear you say that, is it worth me going and taking away all the AMP pages? Do I just leave them as is? What's the strategy you recommend there?
Yeah, I guess it depends on how big of a problem they are for you, right? It's if your AMP pages are working fine, right, and you're probably okay. It's probably not worth the cost and effort and headache of migrating. It all depends on how they're ranking. But if you're finding that, hey, Google's, for whatever reason, these pages aren't ranking, we think it's a technical problem. We tested, taking the same content and making it a traditional page instead of an AMP page, and that page did well, then it's worth trying to figure out how to get off the platform. I'll be honest, I rarely see AMP content in my research anymore. So I could not tell you if it's hurting or not. It's it seems to be that most of the platforms have completely migrated off of AMP. I can't remember the last time I saw the AMP URL in my browser, but I could be wrong.
Let's talk about E.E.A.T. In one of your most recent LinkedIn posts, you talked about E.E.A.T and said that Google says it's not a ranking factor, but it still could be important. How is it still important, and who should use it to be effective on their websites?
Yeah, so I think E.E.A.T is it's another thing we need to really understand as SEOs is how does E.E.A.T work, and especially how does E.E.A.T work from a technical perspective. I think it is a philosophy that Google wants us to embrace and then embody, right? Where it makes sense that we want content with high expertise, high authoritativeness, and is written by trusted experts to rank and perform. We see Google seems to be having a little bit trouble doing that as of late. But really it's you have to think about how would Google evaluate that from a technical perspective? What are the technical factors that would go into E.E.A.T, right? So a big one is this concept called information gain. That's one of the ways they might actually evaluate E.E.A.T. It's more probably concrete methodology, at least, for how they would evaluate it. And basically the concept of information gain is that Google can say, I see 10 pages in this corpus, and of these 10 pages, I can broadly understand that 2 of them are adding content that no one else in the corpus is. So I'm going to prioritize those 2 pages because I can see they're adding net new content. and not just repeating what's already out there. The concept information game was popularized by the late Bill Solowski as he analyzed a lot of the patents around it. I think he was so ahead of his time because that's going to be one of the most important concepts in SEO today, especially with AI generated content. Like, how can Google detect AI generated content? Well, it might have a hard time doing it, but it can detect information gain. So it can at least tell the sites that are actually adding original research and reporting. Like I said, they seem to be having a little bit harder time doing that. And especially with some of the stories that have come out around independent publishers like House Fresh, who did do that research, but still struggled with that, still struggled in a lot of the helpful content updates. But that's the principle, right? So to me and to us at Go Fish Digital, it's kind of like, how do we think about not just E, but the patents Google has filed around it, around things like information gain. Another one, if you're interested, is freshness, right? Like how can Google assess the trust of E? Well, freshness could be another way that they assess it, right? Like if you search best cell phones, like Google's not going to want to rank like an article from 1998 and show you the Nokia N90.
Yeah.
They're going to want to rank an article from 2024 that shows you all the latest iPhones and Androids, right? So it's like, freshness is another patent they filed that we believe factors into E. So we think E's important. We think it's just a matter of like looking at it a little bit more critically and thinking, hey, what are the actual like kind of factors that comprise of E, and not just not just taking the principle at face value. Because Google, in some way, they have to assess E.E.T or whether a site is truly an expert at scale, and you need to basically apply mathematics, right, in order to be able to do that.
And it's also, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not really important for like bloggers or influencers, but it could be more impactful for, doctors or somebody that people have to trust, right?
Yeah, I think it could be, we even see examples of e-commerce sites implementing each, right? And it's hard to tell. It's like REI. REI is a pretty ingenious solution to it. They basically, so if you go onto their snow boots page, they'll have their snow boots products, right? And they'll actually have a separate tab. And if you click that, it says like expert articles, and it links to all of like the different like articles that they've written around like snow boots. So like now what they've done is like they basically connected their informational content. So from an internal linking standpoint, they're like better cross-linking. They've not optimized the page more, and they're possibly adding information gain to that page by saying, hey, we have 20 additional articles also available to users that show how to use snow boots, how to buy them, how to find the right size, right? Like that's all on there. So yeah, I think it's helpful for any site to at least think about it.
Yeah.
I think it's just also, I think the nuance is thinking about like, why is E important? How do they assess expertise? And then information gain is a big way that they can do that.
One of my favorite tools to use, one of my favorite free tools to use is Google Search Console. And it seems like every SEO that I talk to has a different approach on when they go into Search Console, what reports they look at, what they do with it. What is your approach? When you go into Search Console, what's your favorite area to go and how do you use it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Couple of different ways, I guess, right? I mean, one, the 90, the 80% thing that most SEOs are going to use is the performance reports, right? And that shows you exactly which queries you're ranking for. I mean, that's helpful for at least initial strategy, right? Like when you initially partner with a client, right? You say, hey, what queries are you ranking for? Do they make sense to your business? When we look at high priority queries, are they even in here? Are they even getting impressions? Are they even getting clicks? If not, that's an indication that you don't have the right content to even perform against those queries, right? So at least gives you an initial set of data about like, hey, what's your query set? Are you ranking for terms that like are actually impactful for your business? You can do more advanced things, right? With like Search Console, you can actually set up like Looker Studio. You can set up Looker reports that instead of basically like if you set up a Looker report and connect it to Search Console, it'll actually give you 20,000 rows plus of data instead of only 10,000 rows. So if you're a larger site, and do more with those performance reports by actually connecting to a Looker report. That's a big one, right? Search Console will also, like we said, give you like indexing reasons. So if you think you're having indexing issues, there's that coverage report, right? Or maybe they've changed the nomenclature, like pages or something like that. And now that'll tell you, it's like, hey, why are your pages not getting indexed? They're crawled, but not indexed. They have the wrong canonical tag. They're a duplicate. They're redirecting. Search Console will give you that information so you can see at scale what are the biggest technical issues impacting your site. You can also find just like, You can also just troubleshoot, like if Google was able to crawl your page, you can use like the page URL inspector report, run any report through there, and then you can see, hey, is Google able to crawl the page? What's the reason it can or can't crawl the page? And then you can see if Google's actually indexing the content on it. The 80% rule though is like using it for like query, like, there's a lot of great technical like use cases, right? But like probably the biggest use case of Search Console is still the performance reports. And then you can use Search Console to like actually in terms of like your actual reporting. I think a lot more people are shifting to that, especially with GA4, using Search Console to actually, report on their data as opposed to using like GA4 data. I think that's becoming a little more common too.
Where do you recommend people go to get educated on technical SEO? Like you're very versed in it, and I know that you've gone a lot of conferences, and you probably had some good mentors. If there's somebody listening out there and they're impressed with your skills and they're like, man, I gotta level up, where do you recommend people go to learn more?
Yeah. So the one article that always comes up for me, and even though it's like might be considered dated now, I discredit it to so much of like my career. It's called The Technical SEO Renaissance by Mike King, founder of iPull Rank. That article was incredible and it changed a lot for me. So it's like when I started in SEO, I didn't understand technical at all. And he released he released that article, and I just read it over and over and over again. And first I understood like 10% of it. And then I read it again and understood like maybe 25% of it. And I finally kept reading until I understood like at least most of the concepts that he was talking about. And he was talking a lot about to like, view source versus the DOM, and like how, you need to understand, like, and basically like how the DOM is reflective of what like Google is actually crawling, how HTTP2 is going to be a big thing. It was really impactful. So like, I think even reading that article is helpful, but like, if you're less technical and like likely to up the skills, like finding a technical article that looks like it resonates with you and then reading it over and over and over again. Maybe it's not that. Maybe it's Google's documentation, right? Maybe right now Google's documentation scares the living life out of you, right? And you say, I don't even know what they're talking about with all this. We'll just pick one topic, read the documentation over again. If you don't understand it, go back, read it, pick canonical tags, right? Go back and read it first, go back and read it again. You might understand maybe some more implications of canonical tags. Read the documentation again, and you'll keep processing more and more over time. E.E.A.T has a great SEO resource. I believe it's like learningseo.io. Maybe I have to double check me on that, but like he has this resource that basically like aggregates all of these different resources from like all different disciplines of SEO, whether it's offsite, SaaS SEO, ecom. She's got a lot of tech SEO resources there. That's a really good one as well. Lots of beginner's guides, so strong. And then Ahrefs has a bunch of good blog content around like tech SEO. You want to follow Patrick Stocks. He's probably one of the best tech SEOs out there. Give him a follow. He's got some great insights as well.
Chris, I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us today and enlighten us on your technical SEO knowledge. I've definitely learned a lot. I keep thinking as you talk about things, I'm like, I got to go back and listen to this. I got to go back and do this to my site with my clients. And man, just what a wealth of knowledge. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be on and help us understand a little bit more.
Sure. Thanks so much, Eli. Have a great one.
Sounds good. And to everyone else listening out there, we'll talk to you guys next week. Thanks so much for listening to the episode today. Listen, I know how valuable an hour of your time can be, and for you to take that busy time out of your day and spend it with us, it really means a lot. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider liking and subscribing on whatever platform you're on. And don't forget to leave a comment. Tell us what you thought about the interview. Ask us questions. Let us know what other digital topics you'd like to hear about in the future. We're here to add value to your life and elevate your digital presence online. If you'd like some help doing that, reach out to me at fireusmarketing.com. See you on the next one.